It's 7 o'clock, so let's get started then. So our topic for tonight, we're going to be looking at the central pawn majority. This session is going to be interactive, so I would like some participation out of all of you. We do have a short introduction here that I did steal from somewhere, so let's just read this quickly. It talks about the various exchanges during a game. Let me just actually disable this quickly. Disable the waiting room so that I don't need to let people in. Okay, the various exchanges during a game can lead to an asymmetrical situation in which one side has 4 pawns against 3 on the king side, the opposing side being without the e-pawn. The opponent then naturally has a pawn majority on the queen side. In the previous lesson, we analyzed the advantages which can result from a superiority on the queen side. I don't know if too many of you were there for Dion's session last week. It was very interesting. Should be posted on YouTube sometime this weekend if you want to check it out afterwards. But a pawn superiority in the center can also be an advantage, especially in the middle game. If we're able to use our E and F pawns for an attack on the king, these pawns can force the opposing pieces away from the best defensive squares, and in a later phase of the attack, they can destroy the opponent's castled position. Of course, for the valuation of the position, it makes all the difference if this invasion can be supported by the other pieces. Some basic guidelines to follow here. The pawn majority in the center is an advantage if 1, your pawns are mobile and the opposing pawn majority on the queen side is either immobile or has not advanced far enough yet. So we saw several examples last week that Dion showed us where the passed pawns were just way too strong. So we're often going to find that the side of the central majority wants to try to build an attack in the middle game. Whereas if it goes to the end game, maybe the side with the queen side majority is going to have more of an advantage. Someone's microphone's being noisy. Let me just mute them. Okay. The other second guideline is you need to control the open file. This is normally the D file. In positions of one open file, it is very important to control it. We're going to see several examples in the games we look at today where that is a massive asset. 3, your pieces support the advance of the pawns. Just pushing the pawns is not going to achieve us very much. In the endgame 2, these factors can influence the evaluation in favor of the pawn majority in the center. We shall see that in some of the positions in the following examples. The side of the pawn superiority in the center is well advised to advance the central E and F pawns, but you should be very cautious about moving the other pawns so as not to weaken your own castle position. It is important to fight for the D file and place your pieces in active positions behind the central pawns. That will then give you good attacking chances with the breakthroughs F5 to F6 or E5 to E6. Okay, that's enough reading. Let's hop into the games here. So this first game, I think some of you might have already seen. I know, because it was shown in one of our lectures a couple of months back. But it's a game between Uwe and Nessler. Uwe was world champion at a point. He's one of the lesser known ones. But let's see how this game goes. They played D4, knight f6, c4, d6, g3. So black is playing some Pietz or old Indian setup. He's going to put the knight on d7 and then look to play e5 quickly. So e5 it's quite a modest approach by black. He's wanting his share of the center, but he's not trying to be too greedy. White has the option of playing d5, but black can always chip away at the center of c6, and he's relatively happy with a closed position. So white decides to keep it flexible. Knight f3, c6, castles, bishop e7. In the setup, it's very similar to your Philidor setups in that black just wants to castle, put the queen on c7, and then he's kind of just going to think from there. You'll see a lot of people play setups like this in Blitz, because white has to come up with something in the opening if he wants an advantage, and black's moves he can kind of play automatically without thinking. Knight to c3 is played, castles, queen c2, queen c7, and pawn to b3. White decides he wants to fianchetto his dark squared bishop. We get rook to e8. Rook e8. It's quite a nice move by black. It is not only putting the rook actively on the e file, it's potentially freeing up ideas of the knight coming to f8 or the bishop coming to f8. White plays bishop b2 and knight f8 is played. So now I want you guys to spend a little bit of time thinking about this. Is there any way white can create a potentially favorable imbalance? You're welcome to unmute yourself if you have some ideas, or you can just type in the chat. And I will try my best to read everything. Let me get this up here.
Why he knew the state security agency
Has someone unmuted themselves? Do you have an idea?
Interesting revelation. Why the president decided to move the state security.
Or I'm gathering we're just listening to the news. Okay, let me do it again. Okay, anyone else have an idea? Who do we want to pick on? We can pick on Rowan. Rowan, you got any ideas to create an imbalance?
The only idea coming to my mind is just playing something like e4.
E4? Okay, E4 makes sense, right? We want to take over the center. I think E4 is a perfectly reasonable move. Black will probably just continue, I don't know, something like knight G6. And then do we have any ideas following up from this? Or was it just kind of a one move
I
plan?
centralize my rooks and take it from there.
Yeah, you
Like
play
rook to
normal chess.
d1.
You put
Yeah.
your rooks in the center. I don't know. Let's say black plays bishop e6, rook here. Black kind of just sits there. And it's now you would need to find a plan. And it can be difficult in these positions to come up with ideas for white. But okay, white is definitely doing very well with this massive center he's gained. Anyone else have some ideas before we look at what was played in the game? Nobody want to go. Mr. Darrell, you got some ideas how white can potentially create some dynamic possibilities?
I'm still thinking.
Okay, no, take your time. So black's previous move has afforded us an opportunity. There was always this grandmaster, I can't remember his name now, but he always said when you move a piece, it's not where it was. And I always thought, this is stupid. Obviously, when you move something, it's not there, but something we often don't consider too much in chess. Black has moved this knight away from d7. It was preventing something on d7. Hannah's saying b4 in chat. I think, what is your idea with b4, Hannah? Is there a plan with b4? Because I'm going to guess the plan is either to play b5 or c5, which, okay, both look kind of tempting. I think black will probably look to liquidate some of the center. If the plan is to play c5, that would be the right plan, except we can force through c5 right away. And this is what was played in the game. And c5 is very, very strong here. So if we're calculating c5, we probably need to calculate maybe 3 candidate moves for black. We need to calculate black taking on c5, black taking on d4, and black just ignoring us and continuing with his plan by bringing the knight to g6. Let's first look at if he takes on c5. Our plan is not to take on c5 and lose a pawn. Our plan is then to simply capture on e5. And now we have this very strong central pawn that's almost a thorn in black's side. Black has to drop his knight back. Now our pawn is threatened twice, so we need to defend it again. Knight e4. Black can continue threatening the pawn with knight g6, and ultimately white can hold on to the pawn after something like queen c3, bishop f8, and now knight d6.
Michael, sorry.
Yes, sorry.
Just a question there. The previous move, why would black
retreat with the knight after you pushed, after you've taken on the e file with the d pawn, and not simply recapture that pawn with a queen.
If we recapture of the queen, we're donating a queen.
Okay, but you're better than me. You can play without the queen.
Yeah, no, this is something I would do with black, but these are actual good players. So yeah, we don't want to be donating our queen. I hope that answers the question. So, but okay, this position we reach something like this, where after knight d6, it is kind of complicated, but we are holding onto our pawn for now. There's some, because we're tempering the rook, and after rook e7, believe there's even some weird lines where we sacrifice the knight and go e6, and it can get complicated, but ultimately this is very good for white. And obviously the player playing white had calculated all of this, so we now know he cannot play d takes c5. But what if he chooses to take on d4? Now this is again slightly complicated, because if we simply play knight takes d4, he's going to play d takes c5. And we're just going to have donated a pawn to charity. So we can throw in c takes d6. He can recapture this. He probably wants to capture the queen to hang on to this d4 pawn. If queen takes, we can pin the pawn. And ultimately, we end up winning our pawn back with some compensation. And we have an initiative in the center. So these would have both been calculated by both players, which is why black chose to just play knight to g6. Kind of the least confrontational approach. It's c takes d6, bishop takes d6, and rook to c1. Rook c1, as Rowan was wanting to do at the start of all this, centralizing the rooks is a very logical continuation. Rook c1 kind of comes with a threat of knight b5. And if we can pick up black's bishop, that might be very pleasant for us. And we'll have this unopposed bishop on the long diagonal, causing problems against the black king. Black steps out of this. He goes queen e7. We get d takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, and bishop e5. Okay, so some pawns and pieces have been exchanged, and now we need to kind of assess what is left. We have our 4 versus 3 on the king side. So white has that pawn majority in the center, and black has this pawn majority on the queen side. So if you were at last week's lesson, there was examples of this queenside pawn majority getting rolling and causing a lot of hassle. And often the side without the queenside pawn majority had to get very passive to prevent the pawns from advancing. In this position, it is not the same. This bishop, for one, on g2 is preventing the advance of the b pawn. If the b pawn advances, the c pawn is going to hang. If the c pawn ever advances, the b pawn is under more pressure. Okay, also our queen on c2 and our rook on c1 are continually putting pressure on this pawn on c6. If you remember from our introduction, we talked about how if you can stop the pawns from moving, the central majority can be very, very strong. Uwe continues with e4. There is some annotations here, which Uwe says this is a very instructive position, which plays an important role in many lines of games which start with 1d4. White possesses the 4v3 majority on the king side and tends to turn this into the basis of an attack on the king by means of f2 to f4 and e4 to e5. There is little black can do about this. So if you are ever going to analyze classical games, which I really would recommend doing, it's one of the easiest ways to improve at chess, try to get games that are annotated by the people who played them. Not necessarily because their analysis is best, but they can tell you what they were thinking. So immediately, Uwe already thinks this position is really good for him. All he's thinking now is he plays f4, e5, and then he has a great attack. He's not calculating deep variations. That's his whole plan. Black plays bishop to d7, which is a very modest developing move. If he tries to develop the bishop to e6, which, okay, at least to my eyes, feels a lot more natural, white would probably continue with f4. Maybe black throws in this check. And black's position does feel a bit better if these rooks centralized. But he was slightly afraid of f4, f5, maybe being a useful tempo. Now, if white tries this immediately, I don't think it's very strong, because black can blockade on the dark squares. Remember, we discussed how the pawns need to be moving in the center. Otherwise, they're just kind of not doing anything and might even turn into targets for the opponent. So maybe this is something black could have tried a bit better. He chooses to put the bishop on d7. Maybe one day he's thinking of going c5, bishop c6, and activating that way to oppose white's fianchettoed bishop. White plays h3. Can somebody tell me why h3 is played? You're welcome to just type it in chat or unmute yourself.
I'm assuming to stop either knight to g4 or bishop g4
Yeah,
when he plays f5.
it is where
F4.
black's pieces are coordinating. As we discussed, f4 is definitely a plan. Once you play f4, your king is going to be weaker along this diagonal. You don't want to be running into positions where black is playing knight g4 and bringing his knights into all these horrible squares. Also, potentially later on, you're going to have a chance to maybe play g4 even. I'm not saying it's a good idea now. It's probably going to weaken the king too much, but it's another idea that you can potentially build on. h6 is played by black. h6 isn't the strongest move. Because okay, we understand white is planning now to play f4 and e5. So if we look at this from black's perspective, let's say black does nothing. He just passes. This is a terrible move. White is going to play f4. If the bishop drops back and e5, this knight is effectively very close to trapped. He's forced to go to the side here. Maybe off the side, king h2, bishop f3. He could get in a lot of trouble. So that helps us to understand that h6 is played to make space for the knight to come to h7. But this is a very passive defense. I think one of the lines of analysis I saw from, I think it was Yusupov, he gave that, was it rook ad8? Yeah, is a more active try. And after f4, bishop d4 check, king h2, he recommends just sacrificing a pawn here for black, which this does give some active play, because after knight takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, we just get something like bishop f5, and black is at least untangling his pieces. Obviously, if white takes this, black has the discovered attack on d5, and if we move the queen somewhere like maybe g2, black is at least active. I think he's definitely struggling, yeah, but he gets to play the game. Whereas in the game we're going to see, yeah, he struggles to get any counterplay going. So after h6, white continues with his plan of f4, bishop d4 check, gaining a tempo. The king is forced to h2, and the bishop drops back to b6. Black kind of just wants the bishop on b6 so he doesn't walk into any knight d5 tricks like discover attacking the queen and hitting the bishop on d4. e5 is played by white. He's just continuing with the plan. The moment this 4v3 was set up, Juve understood that he just needed to push the pawns. This was his dream, the pawn on f4 and the pawn on e5, and now he's got it. Now is almost when he starts maybe having to think a bit. He plays a natural move, rook to e1, putting the rooks behind the pawns. Now there's all these ideas of the pawns being advanced. And those constant threats are always going to tie black up. Black plays bishop a5, which I'm not entirely sure what the idea is, if I'm being honest. I mean, I think he's trying to stop the knight coming to e4 and potentially d6, or maybe even some sacrifices. So that is at least one temporary benefit, but after f5, he just drops the bishop back to c7. So it's clear black is struggling to come up with a real plan. Here's another note here from Juve, the logical continuation of the white attack. White can now rip open the black's king position of f5 to f6 at any time, and e6 is also permanently a worry. So he's not even calculating these moves. He just understands he puts the pawns here, and black needs to worry so much about either one of the advances, because they can both devastate his king side. Knight a4 is played by white. He's eyeing the c5 square. There's a line of analysis here that looks at knight e4, which is basically a slightly more complicated way of doing the same thing, because you're still thinking of coming into c5, and the whole idea being that if bishop takes e5, you come into c5, and this pen is very problematic. I think the line goes something like f6. Queen c4 check, king h8, knight takes b7. This bishop is kind of stuck in a pin. White has control of these light squares. I can draw arrows. This knight's just going to come back to c5 and have a very nice outpost. And white's position is a dream here. It's fantastic. But knight on a4 basically does the same thing, and it's less for the player playing white to calculate. Rook 88, black centralizes the rooks. The knight comes into c5, bishop drops back to c8. So black has almost achieved now the maximum he's going to get out of his position. White drops the knight back to d3, and now it's kind of the question of what is black doing? So this knight on h7 is terrible. Maybe he's dreaming of coming to g5 one day, but even then it has no future. If he tries to reroute by f8, there's still nowhere to go. These pawns are just controlling so many squares that black would like to occupy. Both the bishops are just biting on rocks. If he ever tries to move the b pawn or the a pawn, he's just creating weaknesses. So it's difficult for black to play. He chooses to go queen d7. Okay, he makes a threat. The queen goes on the open file. That is nice. We did discuss the importance of the open file. White says, no, you can't have the open file. Now black has to worry about the scout attacks. He goes back, and this was chess nowadays. They would just draw or something because they're very boring people. But white understands he has a massive advantage, so he doesn't want any of that. He just goes h4. And h4 is just to stop knight g5 or queen g5. He was only half thinking about going there. It didn't even look that good to him, but now he can't go there. And now it's so hard for black to find a move. In the game, black plays g6, which, okay, Juve comments is a panic reaction, but black couldn't find a plan. Even so, he should not voluntarily weaken his position. And this is something a lot of humans do. If you put them under pressure, you start squeezing, you start taking away their active possibilities, they violently lash out, which I guess part of the reason computers are better at chess than humans. But g6 is a terrible move. It's just weakening the white king so much. But what else is black supposed to do? Probably the best defense is you sit around moving your knight back and forth. Maybe you can try to double rooks. That feels a bit more inspiring to me, but black's under so much pressure. He cracks, and after fg6, knight f4, this pawn is under pressure. The only way to defend it is to play bishop f5, which might look active, but it struggles after queen c4 check. Now the bishop blocks on e6, and the g6 pawn drops. So this is where tactics start coming into play. Last week on Dion's lecture, he did stress very well that tactics always takes precedent to strategy. You can have the greatest plan, you can be positionally beating him, you can have a terrible pawn structure, but if he's forking your king and queen, it doesn't matter. Nothing else matters. Tactics will always come first, and we just make sure we're using tactics to achieve our strategic goals. So after bishop e6, knight takes g6, queen comes to g7. We just get some exchanges, rook d8, bishop d8, queen c2. White secures his knight very nicely on the g6 square. The bishop comes back to c7. The knight comes back to f4. Bishop e5 is played. Can somebody tell me how this game finished? Quick tactical combination. Make sure everyone's still awake and hasn't fallen asleep on me. Again, you can unmute yourself or just type an answer in the chat if you're a bit shy. I'll give you guys another minute or so, and then we'll look at the answer if no one's seen it by then. Just need to consider your checks, captures, and threats.
Is it like knight take e6 followed by like queen to c4?
I believe this does work. I'm trying to remember now. I think this does. Because now, okay, you're pinning my rooks. If I ever go something like queen e7, you can just capture.
And there's some threatening bishop h3 to hit the rook.
Yeah, there's a lot of unpleasant threats. I'm pretty sure this does work. Let's see if Stockfish validates it. Yeah, Stockfish says you're completely losing because you're hanging mate. So that's maybe not the best idea.
No, whoops.
And I think this bishop is hanging. So yeah, I was being a bit oblivious. We both was that. It's simple though, much. We don't need to complicate things. Anyone else have an idea besides Rowan? No ideas. Okay, well, these are simple tactics. You people need to work on your tactics. Bishop takes e5. And after queen e5, this is a fork. So you always have to consider these exchanges, which is why we have that whole thing we teach to beginners where you look at your checks, then you look at your captures, then you look at your threats. Because it's often easy to overlook these games. I played game last Saturday or something against a FIDE master where I basically lost because I didn't see a fork and I didn't see a pin. And that's what there was other problems, but that was the biggest problem. So yeah. Okay, but this was a really nice game. If we look, White's plan was very simple. He didn't make it too complicated. He understood the moment he had this 4-on-3 that all he had to do was push these pawns. He pushed them, he put his pieces behind the pawns. He didn't rush the advance. He made sure when he pushed them that they were able to be stable there. And then at the right moment, after a lot of shuffling, Black eventually cracks. He didn't even have to make the key break. He just sat there, he enjoyed his nice position, and then he calculated accurately. This is another thing. When you have a good position, you need to be at your most vigilant because your opponent is gonna break out. And you need to make sure you calculate everything accurately so you can actually win a nice game. There's so many games where people play brilliantly for 50 moves and they just miss 2 moves at the end and then they don't get the result they desire. Okay, let's move to the next game if there is no questions or comments. So this is a game between Alexander Aliekin against Ifin Bogolyubov. Always very interesting names, but Aliekin is very well known. Bogolyubov isn't too well known, but his name sounds interesting. I feel like there's a lot of games where you see people beating him. You don't see too many of his games. D4, knight f6, knight f3, e6. Black is playing this very flexible setup. He could go for some kind of Queen's Indian of b6. He could play d5. He could play c5. He has a lot of options. c4, bishop b4. He goes for, I think this is Bogo Indian, they call it. Obviously, if White had put the knight on c3 instead of f3, it would be a Nimzo Indian, which a lot of the top grandmasters play these days. Bishop d2, bishop takes d2, queen takes d2, and d5. Black has now traded off his quote-unquote good bishop, but he gets his share of the center and he gets development, which he wants to be quite happy about. e3, castles, knight c3, knight bd7, bishop d3, c6. And okay, white castles. So Black has now kind of turned it into a Slav defense pawn structure. Can somebody tell me Black's 2 main plans in the Slav defense? His 2 main plans for him to activate these pieces.
Yeah, break with c5 and a break with e5 are 2 possibilities.
c5 and e5. So that is possible. There's probably one more as well. I would consider probably more. I don't think you get to play c5 too often. It's very kind of tricky. You can take and then you play c5, that which I presume is what you mean. That is very possible. The other option is you take on c4, then you play b5, and then you get in your c5 break, which could also be what you're referring to. So in this game, he chooses to take on c4 and then go e5. The most direct way of doing things. Which, okay, if White just captures us with the pawn, I believe the idea is black just goes knight g4 and then he picks up the pawn, no problems, and he has a relatively secure position, but there will be this 4 and 3, which is going to be our focus of our game. This one though, white chooses to just drop the bishop back. He's playing very relaxed. We get queen to e7. There's a note here that e takes d4, queen d4, knight b6 is maybe a better option for black, where he will probably get to place his knight on d5. Okay, these games are quite old. There's going to be opening mistakes, but queen e7 doesn't feel too bad to me. Now the key move, e4. White starts kind of taking over more of the center. But doesn't this hang a pawn? What happens if black just... Okay, if we capture on d4, which is what was played, it looks like white has to capture the queen to stay defending the e4 pawn. Which, okay, now maybe the queen isn't so well placed in the center. White decides he can capture off the knight. What is the idea if knight takes e4 is played? Another tactic to Cuthbert. What would white play if knight takes e4 gets played? No, I see Cuthbert doesn't have a microphone plugged in. Maybe she's not here. Anyone else got a response to knight takes e4?
Queen e3 pins the knight to the queen.
Yeah, queen e3, we pin the knight to the queen. If something like rook e8, we just keep building the pressure. And then we're going to play f3 and we're going to pick up either a free queen or a free knight. Most likely a free knight. So in the game, black does not do that. He keeps piling on the pressure. Knight c5, now he's hitting the bishop and he's hitting the pawn. White is forced to go a bit passive. And we see black is starting to activate his pieces. He goes rook to d8, rook a d1, or normal play. Black is looking to take advantage of this pin on the knight. Bishop g4, f3, knight e6. Another tactical blow against this knight that is pinned. Queen to f2, knight d4, rook d4. And this is kind of, I think, where we start thinking strategically. We're now almost out of the opening. So can somebody tell me who they think is better? Let's maybe get a couple of people here. Who do we think is better in this position and why? Both sides have equal material. We see white again does have this 4v3 on the king side. Black has this 3v2 on the king side. Or queen side. I'm not very good at knowing which side is which. Okay, maybe I should pick on people. Mr. Peter, do you have some idea of who you think is better in this position? Someone we haven't heard from. Lavaine, or however I pronounce your name, sorry. Oh, there's Peter saying, I assume white is more attack on the king side. Yeah, that is very true. This f4, f5, maybe even e5 can be very strong. Okay, which black, however, is going to have these ideas of pushing these pawns, which now we need to evaluate which of those is going to be stronger. You say the king side attack is going to be stronger, which, okay, given that our topic is the central pawn majority, that's a very good answer. So yeah, here's Ali Atkins' notes on the game. He said black was forced to surrender the only open file, which, okay, is going to happen after rook fd1. White is going to have control of the file in order to develop his queen's bishop and no longer has any satisfactory defense against the subsequent advance of the extra pawns. The infamous queenside pawn majority plays absolutely no part since the advance in the middle game simply creates new weaknesses. The more these black pawns advance forward, the more easily white was going to be able to target them and exploit them. Rook to d1 is played, pawn b6. Black is potentially playing to play c5. We get pawn to h3 from white. c5. Black continues advancing. He understands the plan. He needs to advance his queenside majority. The rook comes back to d2. You never want to trade on this file as white, because then you're just letting black get his share of the file. When you occupy the open file, you don't trade. White understands this, so he drops the rook back. We get rook takes d2, queen takes d2. Note you don't want to take off the rook and allow rook to d8, contesting the file. That's why we get queen d2. Pawn comes to c4, and now white decides it's time to go f4. Pushing the pawn to c4 for black is a questionable decision. I think the reason he does it is because he feels he can potentially use the c5 square for his queen, or maybe even his knight in the future. But there's also drawbacks. Now a lot of his flexibility is gone. It might be hard for him to get in b5. But he would have the option of playing b5, b4 if he hadn't committed so early to c4. Now there's also the idea of this bishop becoming bad in the future. Maybe there's an endgame where white's bishop is better than black's bishop. g6 is played by black. The reason he plays g6 is to try and fight against f5. Maybe one day he wants to use the flight square as well. Queen d4 is played. White is in control of the file. Now he's centralizing his pieces. He is not in a hurry. Rook to c8, g4. Okay. At the start of this lesson, we did mention that advancing the other pawns other than the e and f pawns can be risky, but it can also have great reward. We see now there's ideas of g5, there's ideas of f5. There is a lot of potential from these pawns. And if you're playing black in this position, you're really scared. You're sweating. You don't know what is coming. You have two choices. You can either sit there and hope it doesn't hit you too hard, or you try to do something active. And as I said, human players, they like to find the active way. So black, he chooses to sacrifice. Bishop takes g4, which, okay, whether this is good or bad, that we need to find out. The pawn takes, knight takes. Can somebody suggest a move for white? Just so that we can demonstrate black's ideas. I think there's only one move for white that is actually winning in this position, which is interesting. So spend some time thinking about it and let's see if we can work out what is the best move for white. The key is to understand black's threat, and when you understand black's threat, you can easily stop it. I will give you guys a couple of minutes to think. Queen d7 is being suggested. Queen d7 makes a lot of sense. Queen d7 feels really good. Because we are threatening the rook and we're threatening the queen. I think you might not have considered queen c5 too much. I'm trying to work out how strong. Is this strong? What would be your response to queen c5? Because it feels like queen c5 is a very strong idea. Because if you move the king to h1, I get this fork on f2. And if you block with the queen, I might be able to bring my queen to h5 and try some ideas here. So I'm not sure if you have a response to this. If you do, I'm happy to be proven wrong. Otherwise, we need to find a different move than queen d7. Rook d4 to block that check and knight d5. Okay, so we're suggesting rook d4. Okay, you're saying of the queen d7. Yeah, rook. This could be nice. But it does feel like we might be tying our pieces up a little bit too much. But maybe you're surviving. Yeah, this might work. I'm slightly worried that we might be getting a bit too passive. We are still on this knight though. No, maybe this is just good. Oh, I like this idea. Because now if I try something like knight f6, which was my initial thoughts, you still can just go queen. Maybe knight f6 is fine. Because now you go queen d6. And then this is, complicated. Chess is hard. And you should be surviving, yeah. Do I have something better? Somebody want to help me find a move here for white? For black, I mean. Because it does appear that queen c5 isn't that good. Yeah, maybe I'm stumped. Let's see if our boy Stockfish validates your feelings. They're saying queen h4 is good. Which, okay, this is a move I overlooked. Because I thought giving away my rook with check wasn't a good idea. But now I guess the point is that black's attack is going to be really strong. And it's very hard for you to stop queen f2 or queen h2 now. Because your queen is out of the game. Yeah, I do think this kind of refutes this line. Other idea is knight d5. Knight d5, I think, struggles to the same problem of queen h4. Because if queen h4, yeah, this queen h2 is going to be really strong. And then black sacrifice feels good. The main thing is how we need to play a move that we can meet queen h4 with. Now we understand what black's threat is. He's even willing to sacrifice a rook to get queen h4 in. So can we find a move that'll counter queen h4? Because if we counter queen h4, we're up a piece and the game is over. If we don't counter queen h4, we're getting ourselves checkmated. I'll give you guys 1 more minute and then we'll look at what was played. Again, if you do have an idea, you're welcome to speak up. King g2, and that is the move that was played. Very well done. With king g2, if queen h4 is played, we just play rook h1. And this kills all of black's counterplay, right? Now this queen is forced back maybe to e7, and then we're just up a piece. And our king is perfectly safe. In the game, king g2 was played, and black understood that bringing the queen to h4 doesn't achieve anything. He just pushes h5. White now plays knight d5, which was another idea that was suggested. Now after queen h4, we get this rook h1 defense, queen d8. After bishop d1, black threw in the towel. Black resigned because there's very little squares for this knight. And if the knight comes to h6, there's this nice sacrifice on h5. And suddenly white gives the piece back, but he's also going to be checkmating the black king with this knight coming into f6. They give a line here of king h7, and then just rook g5, preparing to mate on g7, and some combination of knight f6 with deadly discovered attacks to follow. Okay, so this was more of a caveman-like game. We saw white started getting his ideas going. He prevented black's idea of advancing on the queen side. He got his pawns rolling, and black just panicked. Black did not have the guts to sit there and defend and kind of call white's bluff. He thought he'd rather sacrifice a piece and get some active chances. I'm presuming he missed the move king g2, because king g2 is a really nice defensive move. If you don't have king g2 and you try the other moves that were suggested like queen d7, again, black can even sack this rook in exchange for maybe getting his queen to h2 at the end of the variation. So another interesting game. Let's just quickly review our notes again, which now that we have seen some examples, which the central pawns are an advantage if they're mobile, which is very important. If we control the file, this game especially, we controlled the d file, and it led to us having a very easy game. And then your pieces support the advance of the pawns. If you push the pawns too far and you can't support them and you lose the pawns, okay, that's all your advantage gone. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do some exercises. Maybe we'll look at one more game towards the end, depending on time. But for these problems, I'm going to put a timer on for, maybe let's make it like, how much time do I want to give you? Let's start off like 4 minutes. And then after 4 minutes, I want everyone to have calculated something. So this position is black to play. These are from actual Grandmaster games that happened. I would like you to find the best continuation based on what we've been looking at. A lot of that is going to involve the ideas of strategically advancing our pawns, maybe tactically winning in an attack, something to that extent. But I'm going to give you guys 4 minutes and then we're going to discuss it together. So try to calculate as much as you can in those 4 minutes. Okay, that has been about 4 minutes. So I do see Hannah does have the idea of rook takes d1 in the chat. So now we need to look at this. So there's two options. I hope you did calculate both of the time that was given. If I play rook takes d1, what is your plan? Is there a plan? Was this calculated properly? maybe we'll come back to this. Did anyone else calculate something that they would like to share? We got D6 from Levine. E6 is, yeah. I presume you mean, do you mean E3? E3 could be interesting. I presume the. Okay, now you're saying if I go and take this with my rook, I think rook takes E3 just negates this, right? Because now if you try to take on D1, I'm still protected by my queen. I'm not sure if you meant something else by D6. I don't think that works too much. Rowan, you got some ideas?
So I was thinking about rook takes d1 as well.
Mhm.
Rook takes d1, rook takes d1. I was gonna I was trying to make f4 work.
Yeah,
But he just brings his rook back, I think, and rook, yeah, to e1, and it's tough. But probably bishop f. I was thinking about bishop f5.
and how would you evaluate this position?
I think black is smiling, but I don't think he's winning yet.
Okay, I think that's a fair assessment. And this is, I think strategically black has achieved his goal. He might not be winning yet, but it's a very comfortable position. And there's ideas with f3 or e3. So I think
The
we're,
thing is, if he
yeah.
yeah,
go
but
for
if he takes with the queen, it's a different game, is it
it.
not?
Exactly. That's what we're going to get to. This needs to be
no.
calculated as well.
So I was trying to look at two different moves, either queen c3 or queen b2, trying to see if I can just get out of the pin with the tempo on his pawns, on his queenside pawns.
Okay. That is definitely on the right track. We just need to work out now which one we prefer between queen c3 or queen b2. If queen b2, I feel like maybe we can play something like rook e3. How would you continue?
Mm.
Maybe I can. Maybe something like f4 is yours could be strong. Like without hanging the pawn. We
If he
can't go
just takes
f4.
the pawn, yeah.
Yeah. It's not so easy. Feels like we should be doing well because this rook on e3 is badly placed, but white does control the file.
Yeah, I think we'd have to play queen c3 rather than queen b2.
Okay. What is the difference with queen c3?
Yeah, that's a good question. For some reason I thought we could take the c pawn.
It's a good question for me too, because I can tell you queen c3 is the right move, but now I'm trying to work out why rook e3 isn't so good. Maybe we can just bring the queen back to like e5. If we bring the queen back to e5, and then I want to say that this is a threat, pushing f4. So
But
maybe
then
this
grandmaster draw with rook to d1.
grandmaster draw. I mean, now we can push the pawn, right? And now we're happy. Remember, all we want to do is get these pawns rolling. So I think this could be good.
But then why couldn't we push the pawn off
In the
bat?
b2 variation, if off the bat.
Well, no. Off the bat with that queen c2.
Okay, you mean,
So
yeah.
rook takes, queen takes. Yeah, just.
I think, is it either bishop d3 or is it f3?
Because it's the exact same position. We just put in an extra move.
No, the rook's on e. Okay, oh, you mean after we bring the rook back? No, but aren't we up a tempo or am I going crazy? Maybe I'm going crazy. We come back, okay, and then you're playing, yeah. So our queen is on e5 now, which is where it was to begin with. Okay, maybe I'm crazy. So if we push f4 here, I mean, f4 also needs to be considered, but feels like we might be overextending these. I'm not sure how though.
Don't you just play queen c2 and. Oh no, wait, but then bishop f4 and we're happy.
Is maybe queen d3 the smart way of doing it? No, you can take, and then after I take, you can grab the c4 pawn. So
No, you
Yes.
can't grab the c4 pawn. It's protected by the bishop.
the pawn
Oh, wow.
attack, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Calculating is hard. I think this might just be strong because it's just we need to advance the pawns, which is our whole goal with our central pawn majority. Maybe this
So
is
then
just,
why is queen c3 the move that's played? Because
these are what grandmasters play. Maybe they don't know what's up. Maybe we know better. Let's try to work out. Because otherwise we need a better response to rook e3. In the game, they played queen c1 and they traded queens. And we got a position like this where black
that's
gained.
what Lana's calculating. That's the Lana's calculating.
Yeah. And this feels really nice for black with the open file. So rook e3 though. Not obvious. Maybe they do just repeat and then maybe black tries something different. You know, it's often nice if you can actually have the power to repeat the position if you want to. It's also like a psychological thing. Your opponent has to accept that his position is worse. Let's get our boy Stockfish to help us out. Yeah, he says queen e5. You can also bring the queen back to f6 if you want something different. But yeah, queen e5. What does it say? Yeah, it likes pushing f4. It likes anything. I would think f4 is principled, yeah. So yeah, the
So
main
pretty
idea.
much they just it's just adding a move just because.
Yeah, I mean, if black doesn't play rook e3, which he didn't in the game, he went queen c1. Why, your opponent still has to find a good move, and he has to be happy to repeat. So these grandmasters often like doing that. There's this, I think Ben Feingold, he always has this rule: you always repeat the position if you can, just to like show your opponent who's boss, who's running the show. But yeah, the main idea was we traded rooks. He couldn't take off the rook because our attack would be too strong. If he takes off the queen, his pieces are uncoordinated. So we get to this position now, which, okay, now we need to evaluate this. I'm going to give you guys maybe another, this should be a little bit easier. Let's make it like 2 minutes for this next position. So it is black's move in this position, and I would like you people to, one, find the plans for both sides, and two, work out who you would rather be and which side you think is winning. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. Okay, 2 minutes is up. I see the vein has typed G5 in the chat. Is G5 you? Presume you're suggesting playing it for black. in this position, right? Or are you saying that's white's plan? Because yeah, with G5, I almost played B5. I'm going crazy. Very bad at the alphabet. G5, and I presume your plan is then to push F4, maybe even E3, maybe F3 and cut the king. Yeah, okay, that does make a lot of sense. Sorry, I was thinking B5. I'm terrible at the alphabet. Yeah, I think G5 is a very solid plan. It's definitely going to come into the game at some point sooner or later. Does anyone else have something they'd like to add about this position?
I was thinking to play it a bit more slow, like with rook to B2.
Rook D2. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, there's no reason we can't do both, right? Rook D2, go G5. Like we're in control of the position. And I think that's more what I was looking for is for black, we have these plans of G5. We have an active rook, and we have another advantage, which is that our king can very easily come to the center. And then we're going to have a better king and a better rook. Okay, for white, it is difficult for him to get his king into the game because this F3 square is taken away. So black's advantages is he's going to have a better king and a better rook. White's advantages is he's going to potentially have this pass pawn quicker than we have this pass pawn. Let's just see how the game finished. Black chooses to activate his king, which I think is the most principled way of playing it. We could start off rook d2 or something else rather, but I really like bringing the king to the center. It's the first thing we do. C5 was played, king f6, bishop c4. You could trade bishops here off black, but if you trade bishops, I start to think the most likely result is a draw. There's a saying that all rook endgames are drawn. That is very much not true. I've played rook endings and I go and hang my rook, and then it's not much of a draw. There is still work to be done here, but I think a good grandmaster would draw this. So black plays bishop c8 rather. He's trying to win. He has these centralized pawns. He understands that there is a risk of white going b5 and c3, but he's willing to take his chances. A4 is played by black, by white, I mean. He is wanting to keep pushing his pawns. G5, the idea that was suggested earlier. Potentially playing to go f4. B5 is played. Now we get f4. Again, the same plan is played. He just does it slightly later. Now after king f1, we get rook d2. And the other plan that was suggested is played. They're both played, but they're just done so at leisure because there's no rush. King e1. Now the rook comes to b2. Black is willing to give up the file if it means he creates pressure on white's pawns. G takes f4, G takes f4, and bishop to e2. White brings his bishop back. Maybe he's planning to play f3. Maybe he just wants to reroute the bishop. The main idea with bringing the bishop back is that he can push c6 and try to get his pass pawns going. Black fully centralizes his king. And now we get probably the nicest example of what we were discussing at the start. Black's rook is so much better than the white rook. Black's king is so much better than the white king. The bishops, okay, they're about the same. And the pawn structure maybe slightly favors white. But this is fine for black because he has enough active pieces. C6, he plays b takes c6. White chooses to go rook takes c6. I think pawn takes c6 is maybe a better attempt. There is a variation given here, where black gets a very scary attack going off the d3. And white has to play a lot of ugly looking moves to try and prevent this, because now there's threats of discovered attacks. He has to blockade this with the rook, and off the rook c1, going after the pawn. It's kind of unclear what's happening here. All of white's pieces are very paralyzed, but he does have an extra pawn, and I think white is supposed to be able to survive this if he plays well. But this wasn't played in the game. Rook takes c6 was played. Of course, I think white wants the nicer looking pawn structure, and he now has ideas of activating this rook anywhere along the 6th rank. Bishop e6, bishop to d1, dropping back. We get rook to b1. Rook b1 is immediately coming of threats of this bishop putting pressure on the now pinned white bishop. Rook c5 check, king comes to d4. The rook activates on the 7th rank. Now, the idea is if any of these pins happen, there's a check. Again, not here. What is the idea of the bishop g4? I'm curious now. Are we just giving up that bishop? Okay, now maybe we play f3 and then if bishop takes, we can do this check. But even this is quite unpleasant already. White is just too passive. The king and bishop are stuck on the back row. So black advances, we get f takes, rook c6 hitting the bishop, and now he gets this check in so that he can defend passively. h3, bishop h5. And yeah, white decided to give up. I think the reason he gave up is probably because this is just winning, I think, if my understanding is correct. Because now black can just come and pick up this pawn and he'll win because he has the outside pass pawn. We'll get some variation like this. And I think we're winning this. I think. Maybe I can count. Yeah, and this is easily going to be winning for black. If the white pawn was a little further advanced. But this is winning. So quite an interesting endgame. We saw here kind of the inverse of what we saw last week. Last week, we saw all these positions where white had the better pawn structure and the potential for a quick and easy pass pawn. He got it and then he won. Here, though, black's pieces were a bit too active for him to have that dream going. So very interesting position. Let's maybe do one more of these exercises and then we'll maybe look at another game. So this position is black to move. I'm going to give you guys, how much time should we give you guys? Let's do 3 minutes again. So in these 3 minutes, you're more looking for a plan than you're looking for a move, right? So try to find the plans for both sides and find how we can get those done. Okay. Okay, so I see some people did come back with some ideas. Hannah has 2 moves, g6, and then we have e4. Okay, I presume we'll go a few later recommendations to look at. e4 does feel natural, right? We want to advance our pawns. What is your plan if I just move my knight to d4? How would you want to continue this, Hannah? Because there is the potential of that pawn being advanced too quickly, right? Because maybe that pawn turns into just be blocking our bishop. F5, protecting the pawn. F5, you walk into my fork after knight e6. So I do have a trick. And I was kind of hoping that if you prevented this fork, which I presume you have to, something like queen d7, I was hoping I had some way to prevent f5. I don't think I do, but there is no ideas of your queen being unprotected. I'm trying to work out if I can take advantage of this. Okay, I see you say you didn't see that. It can be tricky, but yeah, I think white is doing relatively fine. Yeah, his knights have decent squares. I'm not sure that there's anything too strong for either side yet, but maybe you're able to get this pawn going. But even then, the bishop will blockade on f4. What was the other? Yeah, Rowan?
Yeah. Well, yeah, no, you can read the messages first. I can speak
Okay.
afterwards.
Okay, fantastic. Bishop f3 was the other idea. Suggested. I presume your plan with bishop f3 is that I play knight takes f3 and then you get to play e4. I think I'm correct in this assessment. And I think this is maybe all right for you. I am still worried about these light squares. But again, white also has the option of taking off the queen. And now e4 is stopped. Okay, maybe your idea is now to play f5. And this does make sense. I'd be quite happy with this position, potentially. Maybe queen d5 and the light squares are a bit of a problem as well. So maybe we should keep that bishop on for slightly longer. But yeah, what's your idea, Rowan?
So obviously my initial idea was to play e5, e4, but obviously knight d4 was the main continuation, and that's how I stumbled onto the idea of knight to f5.
Knight f5. Okay, knight f5 is interesting, as that arrow would suggest.
Missing the bishop, and I have the idea of wanting to play e4 followed by if knight to d so I can just trump it off.
Okay. I think, yeah, knight, you notice there was an arrow. Yeah, it is one of the moves I had looked at beforehand. I think knight f5 is a very good move. I'm trying to think now. If I just like play something like rook e1, are you chopping the bishop or what's the plan?
I was very tempted to chop the bishop.
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame you, right? You're gonna have this bishop on c5 and it's like unopposed. And I think this position is very good for you. So this is a perfectly respectable way of continuing to play. The idea that was played in the game, I think, is more, again, principled. It's more following on the we want to advance our pawns. Knight f5 is perfectly fine. There's actually several moves I listed here as being quite good. Queen c8, intending to bring the queen to e6, just improving the position. So like queen e8, bringing the queen to g6. Queen d7 was also interesting, with some idea of bringing the queen to g4 and getting an attack going. These are all perfectly reasonable moves. The move that was played in the game is knight f7, which at first looks a bit weird, right? Why are we retreating our knight backwards? Now it's not supporting e4. The thing is, e4 is always supported. It's what he wants to do is he wants to play f5 and keep the e5 pawn where it is, keep the e5 pawn protected. And then with the pawns on the 5th rank, he has this flexibility of deciding which one he wants to advance. He's not being hasty. White plays queen e2, we get f5, knight b3, and f4. And he decides the attack is too strong. Bishop comes into c5, now e4. Now both those pawns have reached the 5th rank, and the attack is coming. Knight to d4, and f3. The pawns march on. All he needed to do was get the pawns going, and then they can't be stopped. The queen comes to b5, threatening the bishop. Can anyone find a nice move for white? Yeah, let's maybe take a timeout here. Because our bishop is hit. Maybe our other bishop is also threatened to be exchanged. So there's a very nice tactical move white can play to solve all these problems. Might even be one of the few winning moves. I think there's actually two moves that work. Can we see a move for black here? Now that we've achieved our strategic goals, we need to make sure we play the right tactics so that we don't end up making regrettable decisions. Anyone have some ideas? The focus of this lesson isn't too much on tactics, so I'll give you guys another minute. Yep, Rowan.
I'm just thinking about bishop takes c5.
Bishop c5. Let's just say the knight takes c5.
That's fine. Queen to g5.
Queen g5, and we have these very strong mating ideas. Can I not defend with g3?
Then I'll just go queen to g4.
My whole plan was just to do this and drop the queen back to f1. And I am still on your bishop. And I'm now maybe pressuring this pawn. Yeah.
I can always just move the bishop out the way if I needed to. Like, so I can play like queen, if I want to, queen h3, exchange queens and then move bishop to d, d4, d5 if I just want to bail out.
Yeah. The thing is, are you bailing out now? Because I'm worried that these pawns are turning into weaknesses one day. Because we're not really going to realistically get to play e3. And our bishop is kind of stuck behind them. Like, this is just dropping immediately, isn't it? So, and when this pawn drops, probably f3 is coming soon. So this probably isn't the most desirable solution. You're on the right track though. Bringing the queen in is definitely part of it. Why not take the knight d4 with queen off the bishop takes c5? Okay, this can also be quite strong, as Peter's suggesting. I mean, okay, if we don't want to be down a piece, we probably have to play knight takes b7. And now this is still anyone's game, right? We still have potentially some of our attack left here. I don't think there's a killer blow for white, for black, I mean. Maybe e3 is strong.
Wait.
No.
Queen to b6.
Queen b6. Queen b6 is sneaky.
Yeah,
That is
because
sneaky.
if you take a knight trap,
Yeah, that is a nice little tactic.
but you
And
don't have to take my queen. That's the whole thing. You can just
I mean, what am I supposed to do? My queen's attacked. I think this is working.
you drop your queen back to b3.
If b3, now you just can't just play rook d8. Then the knight is still trapped. Yeah, so I see what's Peter saying. Then pin queen with rook b6 in this position. Okay, yeah, this is probably also quite strong. Okay, so maybe I can't take with the knight. Maybe I have to take with the queen. Which, okay, maybe this is just fine for white. Because now I have these ideas still, at the very least. And I have queen g5 blocked. So, okay, there's probably multiple.
Queen.
Yeah, sorry.
No.
Okay.
That's you pointed out what I was gonna say.
Yeah. Okay, queen c8 though is what was played, and this is really, really strong. So we don't care about this bishop, because now we're threatening queen g4. And you notice the difference between queen g4 and queen g5 is after queen g4, if g3 is played, we go queen h3 and we're checkmating. There's no queen f1. There's no time to move the rook. We also have a different threat of the bishop coming to a6, and that's a skewer. So it's a multi-purpose move. Very nice move. Rook to d1 is played so that the queen can drop back to f1 if needed. Bishop a6, queen a4, now knight g5. All the pieces are coming in for the attack. Black understands his whole goal is he needs to attack in this position, and so he's doing it. Knight takes f3, e takes f3, rook d7. White is trying to activate his pieces. F takes g2. He sacrifices the bishop, which, okay, he had gained a bishop along the way, so it's no problem. Now knight h3. The white king is lured out. And this is almost where we could have a whole nother lesson on king hunts, which, okay, this does go on another 7 or 8 moves, so I'm not going to ask people to calculate it because we are running low on time. But after knight f4, the white king is chased all the way across the board. And there is no rest for the king. The king keeps running. We get rook f4. The knight is forced to try and block to save itself. But ultimately, black finishes it with a nice tactic. Because now if king takes, we get the skewer. So, very nice example, yeah. Black understood the plan. If we saw, this probably perfectly summarizes our ideas. Because we achieved our strategic goal. Knight f7 achieved our goal. Now, what you might want to do is think, okay, the game's over, you can take it easy, lean back in your chair. But you almost have to start thinking more now, because now you need to calculate all the tactics. You know they're going to be there, but you still have to calculate them. They should be winning for you, but you still have to calculate them. And if you calculate them wrong, you're going to lose the game, which is why tactics is so important. But we use our tactics to achieve our strategic goals, and then we find this nice combination at the end. And there is just, the king is chased all over. How much time do we have left? We have 8 minutes. Maybe not enough time to go through a game. Let's do one more of these examples. These are all from games anyway. Is this one good? Okay, I want a fun one. Is this one fun? Let's do this one. I'm going to give you guys, let's say 3 minutes again, and then you need to come up with how white should continue in this position. Okay, that is 3 minutes. Does anyone have some ideas they'd like to share? We have knight a5 suggested in the chat. You're being like me and confusing things. I presume knight h4 is what is being suggested. What is your idea of knight h4? I presume the plan is to free up the f pawn, something with f4. I'm unsure if you're wanting to play f4 straight away or you're wanting to take on e5 and then play f4. Those could be nice. I'm worried that we're running into tactics with this knight potentially being unprotected. I'm already trying to force through some tactics like knight e4, but it's not quite working. I think I can just take on d4 though, because now the knight, if sacrifice the knight. I'm confused. Saying knight h5?
No, they're saying knight h4. The plan is to sacrifice the knight.
Okay, are we sacrificing at g6? Are we sacrificing at f5? I'm not sure. But if we take Yara, you want to... Okay, maybe this is the plan. This makes some sense, doesn't it? Right, now we hit h6, we hit the queen. This could get scary. Okay, I definitely can see the appeal here. Is there a better move I can play now that I have the power of knowing what your idea is? If I go king g7, I'm again walking into this fork. That's so easy. Yeah, knight h4 is very clever, I'll give you that. Presume I have to try and allow the sacrifice maybe. So let's just try queen f8. If queen f8, I don't know if you still want to sacrifice the knight, because now it loses its power because it's not coming with tempo on my queen. Now maybe I'll just take it and say thank you for the knight. There is still chances, yeah. Maybe if you're hunting my d6 pawn and some ideas of rook c3 and swinging the rook, that can make sense. So, but again, it's a little bit hasty. It feels like to me that white's position is really good. So we don't need to play these sacrifices that might backfire on us. So any other ideas?
I'm not sure if you're sick of hearing my voice, but I have a plan.
I mean, you're the only voice that I need in my life. Tell me.
I d takes e4.
Yeah.
Knight takes, and then I was seeing if f4 would work. Queen d4, king h1.
And we need
And
to
I was thinking-
evaluate this, right?
Yeah, and I was thinking black should play c5 to try and pressurize this e pawn as much as possible, but this was sort of the line I was trying to go, and I was wondering if like I play e4, e5, then f4, 5, try and break the king up with the queen and bishop battery.
Okay, this is definitely interesting, and you're definitely on the right track to solving this. What I am slightly concerned is if you play e5 here, you're inviting knight g4. And I have multiple threats, so this might be a bit too hasty. And that's the whole point of this exercise, is if you advance the pawns too fast, like this idea that Rowan suggested, I think it's a bit too fast. You probably can still do it, and it's probably close to equal, maybe better for white slightly. But this counterplay black gets, right? This bishop suddenly becomes a fantastic piece. The queen is well placed in the center. We need to concern ourselves with this knight coming to g4. Our queen and bishop are at the very least like temporarily blocked by our pawn. So it's maybe not the best way. The move that was played in the game, and I really like this move, it's just queen d2. Queen d2 is played to stop that queen d4 check at the end. That's all this is. That's the only reason this is played. The only other option we give black is now we can take on d4, which I think is variation I have put in here. And this is not the worst thing for black. He can try this, but white gets a really nice attack with bishop a2. Now g6 is attacked. The only way to save g6 is knight f8, and now knight g5 and stuff's happening. So he cannot give up his h6 pawn because his king is too weak. If he just defends h6 with his queen, which is what was played. Now we can play this d takes e5, knight takes, rook takes, and now f4. And suddenly, the difference is this queen is now on f8 instead of being centralized. Instead of that queen dominating all our pieces, the queen is sitting there hiding with the king, hoping for the best. And this game quickly goes south for black. After e5 comes in, now knight g4 isn't a problem because we just kick him away because the queen is not in the center. So rook d8, queen c3, knight d5, queen comes to b3, black tries to advance with h5, the knight comes into e4. These are very juicy squares for our knight. Queen h6, rook d1, rook f8, knight d6, king h7, and this is basically, I think, where we'll stop. There is a bit more analysis to this, but basically the game finishes off the f5. White just crushes through. So the moral of this one is you don't want to advance the pawns too quickly. If you can advance them at your leisure, you can take your time preparing it. This queen d2 move, very subtle, but it's just to prevent that check at the end and forces black to be quite passive. Let's just quickly review what we've been talking about, and then we're going to call it a day. So the main priority is that our pawns need to be mobile. You don't want to push them too fast and have them get blockaded. You want to control the files, and we want to make sure our pieces support the pawn advances. These are quite similar to the queenside majority that we talked about, except we're playing more for the attack. We can't just trade pieces and go to an endgame usually, unless we get a long-term advantage, like that one game where we had the centralized king and the rook on the file. That was an advantage, so we were able to go to the endgame. But usually you're going to want to play for the attack and try to maximize your advantage in the middle game. But our time is up. I hope you guys have enjoyed this session. I want to go eat some supper, so yeah. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah. Thanks for coming to Good Stuff.
Thanks for the lesson, Mike.
A pleasure, Ron.